Castleman, and worked with people around the world on this asbestos situation for about 40 years. And I'm going to talk about asbestos in the Americas. I'm going to say a few more things about Canada, because Canada is so important. Canada, as the most prominent of the asbestos exporting countries, and 10 years ago, the world's largest asbestos exporter, has been very important in putting a smiley face on the asbestos marketing around the world. They've been very influential in international organizations like the ILO and the World Health Organization in lobbying for the asbestos industry and in delaying action by these international public health organizations. And they have this caravan of the Chrysotile School of Scientists that go around the world holding these seminars, working with the local chapters of the asbestos mafia and the Canadian embassies in these countries to put on these shows about how asbestos, chrysotile asbestos from Canada is perfectly safe and can be used in a controlled way. And if we could get Canada to shut down the asbestos industry, and Fernando's halfway there to getting Brazil shut down, then it would just be Russia, Kazakhstan, Zimbabwe, and Colombia. Who else? And China as the asbestos mining countries. And then we could put asbestos in the ashtray with the tobacco industry, because they wouldn't have the front men that they have had all along with these Canadian scientists and the support of the Canadian embassy all over the world. So Canada has played an outsized role in the global struggle over asbestos, and that's what attracted Kathleen Ruff, a brilliant activist, to get on and try and do something about this a few years ago. I just wanted, by way of last two items, I did want to say something about, the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Company, the third item, did a tremendous investigation after reading a report that Kathleen wrote called Exporting Harm. They went to India, they filmed footage of workers in an asbestos factory handling Canadian asbestos. These workers were picking up bundles of asbestos in their arms and carrying it across the floor in an asbestos textile plant, I guess as a pre-manufacturing blending operation to mix the asbestos with the cotton they were using to make textiles. And the fibers are all over their shoulders and their hair, and you can see it, the camera work was beautiful. And usually, even in high levels of exposure in asbestos plants, it's not that gross to the naked eye. But in this case, it sure was. And this was so powerful. This was broadcast in June of last year. It was called Canada's Ugly Secret. It was on the biggest national news program in the country called The National, that's broadcast every week like 60 Minutes is in the US. And it had a tremendous impact. Nobody from the Canadian asbestos, from the government, nobody from the parliament, nobody from the Chrysotile Institute was willing to give an interview to the Canadian Broadcasting Company, because they knew they had that footage inside that plant, and there was no way they could talk about controlled use with those pictures rolling. And so I've often told the media in Canada they need to do more of a job of telling the Canadian people that this is going on, or it wouldn't be going on if the Canadian people knew about it. And I almost never fail to give the media a hard time after doing an interview with them and saying, shame on you. As to, in the beginning of this year, the Quebec Premier went on a trade mission to India. The activists in Canada and the activists in India got together and really did a job on that guy. He shows up in India and he's suddenly being besieged by asbestos victims demanding to meet with him and saying how the asbestos is being used in such a deadly way in their country, and will you please stop exporting asbestos to us? And it's got tremendous publicity in Quebec. We've also enlisted some scientists, public health workers, professors and doctors in Quebec for the first time to speak out against this. And this is real important, because this is a battle that's going to have to be won in Quebec. And the last story I want to tell you about Canada is a humorous story. There are these women, call themselves the Raging Grannies. They're women in their 50s and 60s. And they go out and do protests. And so they showed up at the town hall meeting that the leader of the Liberal Party, who at the next election in Canada could be the next Prime Minister of Canada, and there was a possibility of an election last year that didn't happen, but nobody knew when they were going to decide to do an election. And these women showed up, 6 women, with little old grandma outfits, and they're carrying picket signs about banning asbestos and not shipping it to the third world, and they're singing songs that they've made up to popular tunes and handing out leaflets. And one of them got the last question for Ignatieff, the leader of the Liberal Party, who had just puffed himself up talking about human rights on something else. And she said, look, since we're spending millions of dollars to tear out the asbestos in the Canadian Parliament buildings to protect you guys from breathing this stuff, don't you think we should stop shipping it to the poor countries of the world? And the guy said, you're right. I know I'm probably stepping off a cliff here, but I agree with you. We should not be exporting this mineral. And that became, he went back and forth on that over the next few days. You can imagine the pressures that were brought to bear, but that became the position of the leader of the Liberal Party, and it is that today. And this is what the Raging Grannies accomplished. And that's tremendously important because Chinese businessmen were very seriously considering reopening the Jeffrey mine that had been shut down by Johns Manville. And that mine has a huge capacity. And so there was a possibility that the Chinese businessmen would be operating the asbestos business in Canada and using the good name of Canada like toilet paper to go to the third world and the rest of the world to keep selling this stuff. I won't say much about Brazil. Fernando's done an amazing job. There's a journalist blogger who has written a lot about the unethical relationships between the industry and some of the doctors that they've used down there, and she has now been threatened with what they call criminal defamation. This must be some residue from the military dictatorship, the idea of putting someone in jail for saying something critical about someone else. It's a civil matter, not a criminal matter in countries like ours. This case is being vigorously defended because some of the mainstream media have also been brought in this suit as defendants. And so we'll see what happens, but this is the kind of thing. Fernanda has also survived the criminal defamation charges brought by the asbestos industry. And in fact, when she succeeded in doing that, the next announcement was Saint-Gobain selling the asbestos mines and the last of the multinational asbestos industries saying, goodbye, we're out of this business. In Mexico, a report from a government official analyzed Social Security data and called for a ban on asbestos. This was just published. And the graph in this chart shows the stunning rate of increase of asbestos. Look at the mesothelioma rate just taking off starting around the mid-1990s. It goes up and nobody knows where the limit is going to be. That curve isn't beginning to slow down or round off. We don't know where the top of that, where that's going, but it's certainly going up fast. And Fernanda tells me they have similar statistics in Brazil now arising from their steeply increased use of asbestos starting mostly in the 1970s. And same thing is happening around the world. In many countries, it's not being recorded because there's simply nobody keeping track of how many deaths there are from mesothelioma. Mesothelioma is commonly misdiagnosed as something else. And if it's poor people, well, it's not even diagnosed, it's not treated, they're just abandoned in so many countries in the developing world. And so we're not going to have good statistics in some of the other countries where these crimes are taking place. Now, the Pan American Health Organization is the branch of the World Health Organization in North America, South America, and the Caribbean. And there are 36 countries. PAHO has decided to write an asbestos atlas. And they came to me with this project. They said, we want something like the Tobacco Atlas. And the Tobacco Atlas has some extremely unkind things to say about the asbestos industry. It was published by the World Health Organization. But after the scandal of the World Health Organization being manipulated by undisclosed consultants for the tobacco industry, the World Health Organization basically said, we don't want to hear from the tobacco industry. We don't want to hear from scientists representing the tobacco industry. You guys are persona non grata. And I would like to see if we can get the asbestos industry to that point someday. But in any case, because the World Health Organization has taken such an extreme attitude toward the tobacco industry, they have this very powerful document called the Tobacco Atlas. And here these people at PAHO were coming to me, of all people, to write a document about the asbestos industry in Latin America. And I said, that's great. You're even going to pay me to do this? Actually, probably the money will mostly be spent to write the country reports. We are going to get country reports from at least 13 countries, including countries where asbestos is banned, as well as other countries. And it's going to be, we're also getting assistance from leading experts in occupational health. Christina Wesseling in Costa Rica knows all the experts in occupational health. She's a member of the Collegium Ramazzini, and she's going to coordinate a lot of the preparation of these country reports, and we're going to be able to pay people something for writing them. And this will help these individual countries to start to develop the background information they need to develop a national plan to eliminate asbestos, which is part of the goals outlined by the World Health Organization in 2006. And which WHO is continuing to support. The World Bank has published a guidance note on asbestos. If you Google World Bank asbestos, it's the first thing that pops up. It's a 17-page guidance document for the project officers so that they can avoid use of asbestos cement construction materials in all these big construction projects the World Bank finances around the world, and so that they can also require safe practices if they have renovations of structures in which asbestos is already present. There have also been pressures brought on the World Bank since they published this report by the local chapters of the asbestos mafia. They have sent letters to the World Bank, and the World Bank is now in the process of composing the second response to the asbestos companies, basically telling them, you lost at the World Health Organization, you lost at the ILO, don't come complaining to us, you lost. We are following the science, and we don't see any reason to alter our advice to our project officers. The World Health Organization, as I mentioned, is working on national asbestos plans with some countries, and they are also planning to publish a report on substitutes for asbestos cement construction materials, which constitute over 90% of all the asbestos use in the world today. It's in asbestos cement roofing and asbestos cement pipe. And they have hired me to draft this document, and they're now reviewing the document, and hopefully we'll publish it as a WHO document without my name as author. I'd rather see it done that way. So those are just some of the things that are going on.